Hi and welcome. I'm Ashley. I'm an undergraduate psychology student at the University of New England, and today we're here to examine and unpack motivational interviewing, what it is and why it is important, and we're going to specifically look through it the lens of exercise adherence and physiological and psychological well-being and improving motivational outcomes for people. So let's get into it. So, motivational interviewing is a counselling therapy methodology that is utilised to enhance motivation in the client. For instance, we might have someone that comes in who is overweight and is struggling with losing weight, and they have made some previous attempts in the past to lose that weight but have been unsuccessful, so they're feeling quite demotivated about it. So, what's really good about motivational interviewing is that it is a collaborative partnership between the client and the therapist. It encourages autonomy for the client and gives them and evokes desire for change. So, what the therapist might look at first is where the client sort of sits in their desire to change. So, there's three aspects a therapist will look at: the client's willingness to change, their ability to change, and whether they're actually ready to change in the first place. So, this is based on the trans-theoretical or stages of change model, which explores ambivalence or the client's reluctantness or this sort of conflict that they have in wanting that change to happen. And so, what the therapist's role is to resolve that ambivalence before actually going into the core facets of what motivational interviewing is. So, now considering the spirit of motivational interviewing, so the collaboration, evoking desire for change within the client, and also maintaining the client's autonomy, we can look at how the therapist can implement different techniques in terms of the interview process. So, one of the most common acronyms used in motivational interviewing is OARS, OARS. So the O stands for asking open-ended questions, the A is affirmations, the R is reflections, and the S is summarising. What we do instead of accusing or using language that's quite questionable and would actually be off-putting for the client, we ask the open-ended questions of why have you come to see me today, instead of are you unhappy with your weight, or something really direct like that. What happens is that puts the client offside. You don't have the rapport, and you need that foundation in order to maintain and elicit sustainable, long-lasting change. And when we look at something like exercise adherence, it's really important to gather the information from the client themselves. And through open-ended questions, we can actually find out so much more about them. For example, the client who has previously attempted to lose weight, they might have gone through a very rigorous exercise regime, which was not really tailored to their unique situation, and the changes that they're making are not sustainable because what they've been put in place, or what maybe they've been told to put in place, has not worked for them, understandably, when you actually find out the reasons why. When you look at the next letter of the acronym, which is affirmations, this one's also a really crucial one as well, because when you find out from the open-ended questions that the client has actually tried to make this change, it should be acknowledged. It needs to be acknowledged that there's been a lot of strength, and there actually has been a level of commitment, which is a good indicator for the therapist as well, because you can see that they've tried to make those positive psychological and physiological changes. It's just with the exercise adherence, as you might have found out from the open-ended questions, it was not tailored for the client at all. Reflections and summarising are the last two letters of the acronym of OARS, and they're both really important, again, on top of the other two, in building that rapport with the client. So it involves summarising what has been said and actually taking the language that the client used and actually verbalising it back to them, so they can actually have an understanding of you understanding, and also have that desire to change being evoked with them, because they can see what the issues are and what the problems are. So again, that's resolving the ambivalence that we've discussed before. And then again, that desire from change and that conflict is it's becoming more minimal and within the client, and they're actually going to make maybe sustainable change once you keep progressing within the motivational interviewing process. So when the client elicits what's called change talkers, they can actually build a plan with the client for sustainable long-term change. So instead of having complete open-ended questions, you've gotten the information from the client and now you're doing a reflective and collaborative process with them. So for example, you might look at what would the disadvantages of not losing weight be with the client that has been discussed earlier. But also you can look at some more optimistic things, like what would happen if you lost weight in the future? What would that look like? What would happen if you implemented sustainable change now? So a client might say something like, okay, well, I wouldn't feel less fatigued every day. I wouldn't be out of breath as much. And these are the things that would make their day-to-day life a bit easier. So now we have explored the spirit of motivational interviewing, as well as resolving ambivalence, also using techniques such as OARS and eliciting change talk. But at the heart of motivational interviewing is a very special acronym called RULE. So the R stands for resisting the writing reflex. The U is understanding the patient or the client's motivations. L is listening with empathy, and E is empowering your patient. So with resisting the writing reflex, although the therapist is the practitioner and has the knowledge, you've got to remember that it is a collaborative process and you're not telling the client what to do. You are facilitating change and desire for change. So again, coming back to the spirit, evoking the desire to change, that is so important because a client really needs to find that within themselves. So that's the important part of building that collaborative relationship with the client. Just a few final notes about any barriers to change and how we can sort of overcome and resolve those barriers as well. So, clients tend to desire a quick fix solution, which is very human and very understandable. So, the client that we have mentioned before wants a quick fix solution to losing weight and instead of all that effort that they've put in beforehand, and they're very demotivated and they're becoming very frustrated with the process of motivational interviewing. So again, it's keeping in mind the importance of the two acronyms OARS and RULE, and sort of listening with empathy and the open-ended questions, and also the reflective capabilities as well, and integrating that as well into the collaborative partnership with the client. So by listening to them and allowing them to speak about their frustrations, that's when you can actually take that on board and lead with that, and to actually unpack that a little bit further. And then to evoke that desire to change again. So that's building the self-efficacy that they do have the capacity to change. And while it not be the quick fix solution that they initially wanted, they should be coming away with something that's even better, that's even more sustainable, and that's something that they can work towards themselves, and they will continue to do so long term. So also another barrier to motivational interviewing is that the therapists themselves might be really time poor. So in terms of the sessions, they might actually be really short, or they might not have, the therapist might not have as many sessions with the client to actually create and implement intentional plans with them. So what a therapist might do is use something called an information ruler, where 0 is being presented to the client as like having no motivational desire for motivation, and 10 being like the ultimate desire for motivation, and asking where the client sits. And this again comes to assessing ambivalence that we looked at before, and seeing where the client sits, and then working with them to go, okay, this is where you are now, this is where you want to be in the future. Especially after coming out of that interviewing collaborative process. Hopefully you have a clearer idea of what motivational interviewing is. So remember the spirit of motivational interviewing, that it is client-centered, it is a collaborative process. Remember the two acronyms OARS and RULE, and how they can really facilitate long-lasting change, and especially with something like exercise adherence, because it is a tricky one, and it is something that you will find a lot of people have tried to do before, particularly with health goals such as weight loss, and then just understanding and being empathetic and listening to the client as well is just so important in helping them to have really good psychological and physiological well-being, and to sustain long-lasting change. Thank you.